and we are live with our 274th episode of Absolute AppSec. I'm Ken Johnson at CK Tricky on all of the social medias that are now out there, joined by my co-host, Seth Law, at Seth Law, also on all the social medias. Seth, say hi.
Hey, everyone. You know, if there's a social media that's out there that we're not on, let us know, and we will be inactive on those ones as well, right? No, I'm just... Sorry,
Dude,
welcome back to another episode. Yeah, exactly.
I put on LinkedIn this. I was like super annoyed. I'm like, I don't pick a thing. I don't want to go on Twitter and Blue Sky and Mastodon. Pick a thing. It's getting frustrating. I don't care. It's just one thing. If you can't get along, then don't go on social media.
So if you want to get a hold of us, the one place you know that you can find me and Ken is on Slack. Absolute AppSec Slack. We post stuff there as we have time. And we respond, right? Like that is the other place that, yeah. So, sorry. Apparently that's how today is going to go because we've got a lot of spicy takes. It hasn't been just me and Ken for a couple of weeks, and there's been quite a bit of activity that's gone on. Asset Node has been acquired. We're going to dig in shortly to OpenGrep because we all have feelings when it comes to Semgrep and OpenGrep. And obviously, it has struck a nerve across the industry. But before we get into that, I did want to bring up that we are going to host another session of Harnessing LLMs for Application Security on February 20th and 21st. This is open enrollment, that we still have a few slots available. If you are interested, it's a great way to get to know AI, how to use LLMs, how to do some of what Ken is doing at Dry Run, what I'm doing externally as a third party with source code, with with application security tasks, how to utilize your AI and how to get into it. More details are available at training.absoluteappsec.com, or just go to absoluteappsec.com and you can find out more about it. Or if you have questions, but please come join us. It's going to be a good time. Outside of that, I did want to give a shout out today to Dry Run Security for being our sponsor. Dry Run is the next class of static analysis tooling that finds the needle in your haystack of pull requests, stopping unknown risks before they start. Our LLM powered natural language code policy goes beyond pattern-based scanning to catch nuanced authorization and business logic flaws that traditional SaaS tools miss. Define policies in plain English, no complicated rule writing. That means fewer missed vulnerabilities, less developer friction, and more time to focus on real threats. It's a whole new approach to SaaS that keeps you ahead of hidden risks. So thanks to Dry Run Security. If you haven't played with Dry Run yet, go to dryrun.security and check it out. There's quite a few AI tools that are popping up, but obviously it's near and dear to Ken's heart, and we've been utilizing it as Redpoint as well. It's a great tool to jump into. So those lines, yes.
Yeah, and I have a new feature I will be demoing that is like we've talked about as part of our funding announcement, but I want to demo that not today.
I mean that was the other thing.
I showed you, I previewed to you, but
yeah. And I mean, congrats to you and the team too as well. The next round of funding, that's huge, right? Like to keep it up, and it's fun to see where things are headed.
Yeah.
Let's see. Outside of that, there are a couple of conference things that are going on. I think both of us are going to be at CactusCon the end of next week.
Yes.
So if you're going to be there, let us know. I'm leaning towards doing at least doing a get together the night before the conference on Thursday night. Because I've got to head out on Friday. So watch this space or watch Slack for an invite or a location where we decide to hole up on Thursday night, and just do a general meetup. I'll probably have some shirts and socks for Crocs and Socks with me as well. So I'm looking forward to seeing everyone down in Arizona next week. And yeah, with that, I think, yeah, I'm like, let's dig into one of the articles. Or actually, let's dig into OpenGrep. Since I don't know if we're going to get to anything else after we start into it.
Hey, I did want to mention something about CactusCon too while you're pulling that out. I am actually getting a little concerned because there are 3 separate storms over the next. So I fly out on Thursday for CactusCon, and on Wednesday there's going to be allegedly a massive foot or more of snow dumped in our area, and then one snowstorm and ice storm leading up like over this next week up to that Wednesday. So I'm just like, man, I just fingers crossed nothing happens because I'm flying out Thursday. My talk is on Friday. And I'm like, just anyways. So the nerves are all there for travel right now.
Well, that's always this time of year, right? Like February is a fraught month for weather events. Right? That's all you can say. So good luck with travel if you are traveling.
I know you laugh at a foot of snow out there in Utah, but it's a pretty big deal for us.
Yeah. We're also set up for it. Like it's expected. So that's part of the reason. Yeah. Sweet. Okay. So first things first. OpenGrep was announced 2 weeks ago, I think it was.
Yes.
I'm posting the link, opengrep.dev. Yes. Let's see. Yeah. So OpenGrep is a fork of the community version of Semgrep. And if you go to opengrep.dev, they basically they walk through their reasoning behind starting OpenGrep, right? There were some changes in Semgrep's licensing that basically made it limited access to what you could use Semgrep for, like Semgrep community for. Now, from an overall product perspective, this is not that shocking. We have quite a few vendors that were using Semgrep community within their tools as well. And, almost piggybacking off what Semgrep is doing from a production or from a commercial perspective, which so like them changing that license is not overly shocking from my perspective. And the OpenGrep developers or the OpenGrep community is trying to maintain that specific version for use in those different products, right? So I mean, on the surface, this seems like a logical, a foregone conclusion, I guess, or a logical follow on to what's going on within Semgrep and with Semgrep community specifically. And that was my initial take, was like, oh, okay, like we're going to maintain OpenGrep as like this clone of Semgrep that has similar capabilities, or at least continues on with the community version.
And I want to add something here, if you don't mind, because so I actually need to do a little bit more to understand the nuances of this license change. If you have some information on that, because I just have the summarized version, I like to dig in, and that's what I did originally, and I'll tell you why. So when we were first going through trying to build our product, obviously it would have been really easy to do some filtering out before we even got to some of the like more advanced analysis of things by just using like some pattern matching type stuff. So we were exploring ways that different ways of doing things, and one of those ways was like, it was suggested, well, what about using Semgrep? And I was like, I don't know about that, but let me look at the licenses. So I had dug into the licenses, and LGPL 2.1 was what they applied to community created rules as well as the underlying engine. And that's probably the important distinction, is the engine and the community rules were all LGPL 2.1. But they had a clause for the professional. I don't think it was a professional engine, but I do know it was professional rules, right? So like the rules that they write specifically, those you could not put into your product. And for me, anyways, there were a number of reasons. For one, like from a technical approach that we ended up with code inquiry methodology we use, like we don't have a need for Semgrep. But also, even if we did, I would have never allowed it. And the reason is that, like, as I thought about it, I'm like, yeah, that's problematic. What if there's a license change and that's like how you've underpinned big aspects of your product, or what if that underpins some big parts of your product? Like you're going to have some serious issues that overnight you're going to have to address, which is why obviously there was a change. And apparently the change is just an expansion of that original clause, is what I've heard, right? I actually need to look at the content myself, but only so many hours in a day, so I took the summarized version, and that's what I think is happening now, right? Is these vendors that have backed their solution by Semgrep are now realizing, because this is specifically targeting those types of companies, is people that are just packaging in that engine and then just selling it. And it's like, well, if you chose to build your product built off of this, you're going to have some issues. And I believe that's why OpenGrep exists, not for some like altruistic reason. But anyways, I'm getting too far ahead, so I'm going to pause there on the license aspect so far. I shouldn't have even added that comment because we'll get to all that. But in any case, that's my understanding. Is that your understanding of the licensing change, that it just pretty much affects people whose products are
Yes,
around?
and specifically, like if you go to Semgrep, like the Semgrep project on, like for the engine specifically on GitHub, the license is still LGPL, right? So it's not necessarily affecting the main engine itself. It's affecting the Semgrep rules package, right? Which is basically restricting.
The community edition rules can no longer be used as part of the product. And they could be before. I see.
Yep. And that was it, right? Like, so the limitations, if you go to the rules license on semgrep.dev, which is their main, the company website, it basically, the limitation is that you can use the rules only for your own internal business purposes, right? So it does not allow you to distribute the rules or make them available to others as a service. So the limitation is not necessarily on the community edition, like the engine itself. It's on the rules that have been created that are being hosted by Semgrep as well, that are the open source rules, or were the open source rules previously. And when you have that embedded within your product and you are like utilizing those rules, this is a fairly significant, to your point, it's a fairly significant business change, because you no longer can depend upon those rules, and you're going to have to come up with your own set. And so they've tried to preempt that, right? If you go to the OpenGrep organization on GitHub, right? There's OpenGrep rules as well, right? So the OpenGrep engine itself has the same license. I mean, it's a straight on fork of Semgrep, just kind of rebranded. And then the rules as well are a fork, but from before the license change to the Semgrep rules, right?
So to put that in plain speak, any community written rule that is applied to OpenGrep rules can be then now baked into their product, instead of having to, I'm going to choose my words carefully here, then repurpose community written rules that are hosted and deployed by Semgrep.
Yeah,
right.
Basically. Yep. Yeah. And so, yeah, there's been a lot of talk about how this affects, right, like the industry at large. We've seen this transition multiple times from like open source products to closed source or to commercial products or maintaining, right? Like, you have things like Nessus back in the day, Snort, right? There is a laundry list of open source projects that were closed source or that were forked, and there's a commercial version that exists behind the scenes, and how well those organizations do. The backlash is always interesting to me, as far as like, hey, there's an organization that's built this community product that we've come to depend upon, and now it's closed source, and now we have to pay for it, right? No more free lunch, right? Like, if you think about it from that organization's perspective, the developers want to get paid for what they're actually doing, which I get, right? Like, this is very much this is intrinsic to open source. This is what happens over time. Developers actually have to put in time to build these products. And if they're not supported by an organization, they need to survive at some level, right? Now, you could argue Semgrep's doing just fine without this change, but obviously this was affecting their business in some way, hence the license change. So, I go back and forth on whether or not this is a bad thing for Semgrep to do. What's your take there? How do you feel about that change to the open source, rules specifically?
Yeah, I think it's smart for Semgrep to protect themselves, frankly, and because it doesn't actually impact the. This is the thing, it doesn't actually negatively impact the community, like, at all, right? It actually impacts companies trying to make money off of their product, and
Mhm.
and more so the actually, you could argue too that they're trying to make money off the community, because these are license changes to community rules. So the community who has created rules contributed them back to Semgrep, you know, like I really, like, they're still able to use those rules. Anybody's still able to, consultants, they say it very, I linked to their Semgrep's blog. It's very plain speak, like, consultants, uh, folks internally at their, who want to defend their company against whatever things and want to use Semgrep community rules. They're all fine to do that. The only people this seems to affect are people that have taken uh, the rules supplied by the community that supports Semgrep, and put it into their product. And from a from putting on my, like, CTO startup, VC world, hat here, yeah, I mean, it makes sense. Like, there's a lot of money involved in this, right? There's a lot of different interests involved, but yeah, money, right? So, like, if I'm in a board meeting and I'm saying, well, we had we think we can reach this much and project this much in sales. And they're like, why can't you do this much in sales? And it's like, well, we've got some new players that just hit the ground running, and they've taken, some of the newer technologies that are out there. Plus they're using Semgrep rules to, like, bake that all together and create a product. It's like, well, wait, hold on. Are they unseating us from contracts? Are they causing us disruption? Or do we think those, so those sales numbers aren't going to be like this projection? They're going to be a lesser version of that due to these folks. What do you think the reaction is going to be? It's be like, yeah, probably don't, take those things that now. Now I'll say, I don't know if the community cares much. I really don't know. Like, I've seen, meaning, let me finish that sentence. What I mean is, I don't really know if I am not impacted in a way where I can't use the rules that I wrote, do I care that much? And that's what I'm really getting at. Is like, I don't know if the people that wrote the rules for the community, I don't know how upset they are. I actually don't know at all. I mean, maybe somebody is, maybe somebody's not. I really don't know. I can't imagine that I personally would be, right? If I wrote that for the community to use, and Semgrep's like, well, everybody can still use it, just like not people that are competing with us. It's like, that doesn't really impact me. So I don't know how much of an opinion I would really have there. And I have done that. You and I'm sure you've done it too. Like, I've written rules for, all kinds of different open source tools. I spent a lot of time, like, with Dradis, if you remember Dradis back in the day.
Yeah.
I think I wrote, like, their Nexpose rules and a couple other rules that just contributed to it. And that product went commercial, but I don't care. Like, that helped somebody, and that was fun for me to do, and whatever. So in any case, so that's kind of my opinion now from a so that's from the business standpoint. I totally understand Semgrep's move, and I don't, and I think it makes sense. I like it. And then I think from the other side of the house is, like, I don't obviously I don't want to like I'm not trying to like upset everybody who is behind OpenGrep, but I also have to be like pretty honest and say, yeah, I don't I because I've heard the argument that people think it's just a marketing ploy, and I don't think it's just a. I mean, sure, it's cool from a marketing perspective or whatever if it lands right, which we'll get into that article that kind of breaks down where things didn't land right because they obviously did not land right. But if that had landed right, I don't know. I don't like I I don't know how much of a marketing thing that is, whatever. What I would say though is I would speak more to the product side of things and say like it's pretty obvious. Like if I needed you to create me rules that I could bake into my product, and I can't do that because they're now hosted on a platform that is inaccessible licensing wise to my company and the other companies who I know are also using your community rules, would it then not make sense to band together and create a thing and make it sound really altruistic and say like, cool, now put all your rules up on our repo?
Mm-hmm.
So, I'm just being very blunt and honest, like the only way I can be. It's weird because obviously, like, yeah, there's a lot of interest involved here. So I'm sure I'm going to make somebody upset, but um, I'm good at that. So I'm curious to hear, though, now that I've said my uncomfortable piece of all of that out loud, what do you think about the whole move for OpenGrep? And yeah, what are your thoughts on that whole shift and the motives behind it and all that?
Yeah, I I have a hard time with you're piggybacking off of what somebody else's, like the hard work that they've done without any sort of compensation for it, right? So Semgrep's obviously built this tool over time. You've integrated and if you go through the OpenGrep like list of products that are in there, most of them claim to be doing static analysis, right? Like they're saying like, oh, we do SAST, and it's a piece of their product, right? And but there's not really any credit that's being pushed into that hey, we're taking Semgrep and we're utilizing this open source version, and then we're pulling those vulnerabilities in, and that's how we're accomplishing this specific task, right? Like there's a lot of, oh, we're just finding it and we're doing that, without necessarily giving credit where credit is due, right? And so part of it feels disingenuous to me, right? That hey, you got all bent out of shape, but maybe if you had treated this as it should have been treated up front, or maybe if you were working with Semgrep in some fashion, then it wouldn't necessarily have gone the same route. And that being said, right, like every organization struggles with this from a I kind of hate the term, but ASPM, right? Like from an ASPM perspective, is we've got to build a dashboard, we got to get all the vulnerabilities in, we've got to figure out how to actually quash those vulnerabilities. So Semgrep is one of the feeds that we are pulling in order to quash those. And then over time, any of the organizations that I work with, yeah, there's the open source or there's the commercial rules that are available from Semgrep, but I feel like you're building your own set anyway, right? If you're doing application security properly. And granted, we can, that's a whole nother topic, right? But it should be customized, right? And that is the power of Semgrep, OpenGrep, whatever you want to call it nowadays, but that's the power of what Semgrep actually gave to us, is this ability to be like, hey, this is how we do things internally. Maybe we shouldn't be depending on the open source or the commercial rules. I mean, if it's good enough, it's good enough. But if we really want to get security embedded in, we should be building those rules based on our own requirements and our own coding patterns, as opposed to what's generic and what's out there. Now, we all want to hit the easy button, and that's what this is getting us to, is what that easy button actually looks like. So the open source rules that are out there catch some of that low hanging fruit. That's great. Should they be giving credit where credit is due? Yes. Does it mean you shouldn't be using this internal to your product? No, I like it. It is another source, but maybe it just needs to be a little higher up. And granted, at this point, they are admitting that they are using OpenGrep inside of their or Semgrep inside of their product, and it's kind of forcing their hand at some level to actually go and put their money where their mouth is. And now, like what keeps going on in the back of my head is what we've seen happen to Zap over time, right? Z attack proxy.
Yeah.
And like I feel for the developers and how Zap has has struggled to find a home because organizations that support it and support that open source development don't necessarily pay what the developer should be making for the product and the value that it's providing. And we saw this over time as well, like Zap being embedded into various products without a lot of payment going back to the developer in and of
Right.
themselves, right?
That's been
So,
commented on by a lot of our community over and over again, how
yeah.
Simon poured hours of his life into this product and never really received any kind of nowhere near the compensation for all of the time put in from the companies that have built products on the back of Zap. So you're right.
Mhm.
Like it does feel very similar in that way.
Yeah. And Semgrep has definitely been more successful, right? So they built the engine, they've got their commercial rule set, they've got the dashboard. And this is where like that line hits is they've got their dashboard, they've got the ability to integrate. There's certain features that are available only within Semgrep, like the commercial version, which is what I would expect, right? And this slight change is basically to, I mean, this license change is really just to protect that interest that, hey, guess what? Like, we know that other people are using this. So, hey, right, like if you're using it for your internal business, right, you're using it for, from a consulting perspective, you're not trying to sell the results, you're not trying to like compete with us, then go for it, right? Like, that's great. But if you are, then guess what? You're probably not going to get the same level of support. And we're going to cut that off. Like we're going to start to cut that off yeah, to prevent that competition. So yeah, I don't know. I kind of go back and forth. Semgrep is turning into a bigger company at this point, right? Which is what, rightfully so. They've been very successful. They've started to suck up other application security vendors, right? Obviously, like we're big supporters of some of the. I mean, we use Semgrep. I use Semgrep on pretty much a daily basis. The open source or the community version with some of those community rules, and we're a big supporter of some of the people that work there. Right, obviously, right. Like we've had Clint and Tanya on the podcast multiple times. Like they're doing a lot of good research. And so I don't necessarily want to say that this, well, yeah. If it was a completely bad thing, I would call it out. I don't necessarily think it is. I'm more interested to see what OpenGrep actually does and if they're able to sustain what Semgrep has started. Yeah.
Yeah. And like, actually, you bring up a good point that I want to mention is like on the note of Semgrep versus the vendors that are behind OpenGrep is like, the funny thing is like, my opinions are truly my opinions because like technically Semgrep's actually a competitor for us, right?
Mhm.
Whereas those other companies on there, they do different things. Like some of them just provide like auto remediation patches or whatever to you can commit in or whatever. So like we don't even really compete with a lot of those companies that back OpenGrep at all and do so. Like this is truly my opinion, right? Like I'm taking all the facts in and I'm saying like, you know, yeah, I actually think it's not, I don't know that it's as beneficial as maybe it's being touted as or whatever. So, and I think SemGrep, I completely understand where they're coming from and actually like think it's, probably a smart thing to protect their own assets and IP. I'll say this too. The other thing that I was thinking about in addition to like everything that you've said, the one thing neither of us really brought up yet is that there are products out or projects out there, at least one that has come to mind, that is a Semgrep alternative. It works the same way, right? Like it's not that, sorry, this is not taking away from anything, but it's, it is just ASD parsing and applying essentially regex against it and doing the abstraction layers between those two activities at a high level, right? I'm not saying like it's not diminishing anything. They're super smart people over there. I'm just saying like that's kind of how it generally flows. So I have seen other projects recreate this type of thing. And I don't know if these vendors went to that. And to be clear, these are vendor interests, right? These are vendor backed. This is a vendor backed open source project, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. Maybe those vendors all came together and went to those projects and said, hey, why don't we actually like funnel some money into making these Semgrep engine alternatives better, plus community rules. If they did that and they were told no, okay, but I think like that would be just for perception wise and keeping everything sort of above board. That would have been probably the route I would have pursued in their shoes, which is, just try and do something try and contribute to something that does something very similar, make that engine better, but also the rules better. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Versus just like, anyway, so it's very, and I think the last thing that you and I need to really talk about is sort of the article that you've posted up here, Rohit's, because I'm curious to hear, like you and I had a couple late night DMs back and forth about it, but I'd love to hear your fully thought out, like, what did you think of that article? What did you think of the stuff written in it and all of that?
Yeah, I'm going to pop it up there. And I did drop it into Slack as well. I like part of me, and I think I said this as we were talking, as we were, texting back and forth on it, is he's it feels a little naive and just like, hey, I'm going to jump onto this, like all the spicy takes that are going on right now, right? That they actually haven't done anything. I'm scrolling through it again right now, right?
It was pretty spicy. I mean, I was like,
it is, right? Like, feels like he wants interaction there. Yeah.
Even for me, like I was like, ooh, that's spicy. It felt opinionated for sure. Not in a bad way, but just like, whoa, like.
Yeah, and I mean, he's definitely coming through with like, he's trying to build a case for why he thinks it is just marketing hype, right? That it didn't really actually, change anything, right? Especially where it's a new project too. I'm like, okay, so you're jumping on this bandwagon and they've just barely forked the project, right? Like,
and by the way, that's why I say it didn't land well, because what you're saying, where it's like it came out, but it didn't come out with all the things that it really should have come out with. But I shouldn't say all the things it should have, all the things it should eventually have. That's what I should say.
Yeah. And I mean, eventually we'll see what happens over time, especially the fork, this LGPL fork of Semgrep, the engine itself, not the rules. I really want to separate out between the engine and the rules, because LGPL on the engine itself is basically saying, guess what? If you put commercial time into the Semgrep engine, the OSS version, you've got to submit those back up, right? That's what LGPL is. So OpenGrep is basically the same thing, right? Like if you make commercial changes to it, you got to push it back up. And yeah, I don't know if it's really going to diverge that much. Are they going to diverge, from, because any changes that they push back up or get pushed into the Semgrep engine, aren't you going to want those in the OpenGrep version as well, right? Are we just maintaining two instances of the same thing, and the rules are really what the rule sets are just going to be the only difference. So he gets into that a little bit here with this idea of the the licensing myth, because he's right. Like the rules licensing changes are what is actually important here. But then digging in and being like, hey, guess what? When the email doesn't currently exist. All right. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, there's quite a bit of like hygiene and basic security hygiene when you're going to do an open source product or product, whatever you want to call it, that like just don't exist. And that's why I say it didn't land well, because it's sort of like, well, again, I can't speak to the marketing aspect of how it landed, but I can speak to the like, or the totality of their marketing efforts. But I can speak to the fact that like, yeah, stuff like that doesn't look great when you release something. You kind of, if you're going to do something like this, which is going to be, it's going to make some people cheer, it's going to make it's going to be polarizing, right? That's basically what I mean is that people are going to have very extreme views on something like this. You do tend to want to make sure all your ducks are in a row before you go ahead and publish. And at the same time, I think what you're saying is this author went pretty hard in the paint on them for these kind of sort of not great, but still relatively fixable, type. I would say the pie thing actually is, pretty big deal. I'm not gonna lie, that's not great. But the rest of it, it's sort of kind of just hygiene that needs to happen over. Again, I would do it from day one, but it can be introduced in the week or 2 weeks after this was sort of because obviously this was a move quick type deal, and I'm sure it's people say it's move quick from a marketing perspective or whatever, or like it's for that reason, but I don't think it's just that. I think like it's capitalizing on sort of the momentum eyeballs period. Like if you want to get your project to have very quickly adopters and contributors piggybacking off of something, whether that's for, how do I say it? It's not, I don't mean this from like a marketing for like money, but a marketing from like just getting people, like basically riding the wave of this news and acting quickly so that you can get adoption onto your project. And I don't mean it from the other way that other people, I assume, meant it, which is like trying to, well, in this article definitely means it, which is ride the marketing wave for like, look at us, behind this project, vendor kind of stuff, which I don't think it, anyway, I don't know. Like, and I like, the thing is, I know some of the, I know some people behind this and I like them. So it's like, this is weird. This is a weird one. It's like, no, I don't think it was the greatest move in the world. I'm just to summarize it. But this article, I also was like, man, this is pretty, it's not necessarily wrong, but like, it was, I thought it's harsh. I thought it's pretty harsh. So I don't.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, and this is kind of what it comes down to, right? There's other repositories of rules that are out there, right, for Semgrep. So like, and that's realistically what this project is defaulting to, is a new rule set based on the open source rules, how they were before they made the license change, right? They should have come out with it in that same manner, because I like Trail of Bits has a bunch of rules that they've written for Semgrep that are public, and anyone can go and run those rules against their code base, right? Like that's great. That seems like that would be a point in their favor if they had just done that, instead of like forking the whole engine and then attempting to basically take over what that's going to be over time. And so I get what Rohit is trying to say there, but he did go pretty heavy into the fact that they didn't like have security.txt or whatever, like all that stuff set up. They didn't think about the fact that there's a lot of people that install Semgrep via pip, right? Like via PyPy, instead of downloading the code. And then, right, like, so there was a lot of this thought that didn't go into it, which means at some level, he's right. Like it was marketing, the marketing teams got together and, got together with legal at some point and basically, and some of the product development and said, hey, we need to like get ahead of this, but they didn't think it all the way through. Right.
Right.
Yeah. So I don't know. Like it'll be interesting to see what happens over time, if it's sustainable and if they put the resources into writing those rules as we would expect them to do, given the number of organizations that are involved, or if it just becomes another has been. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. Like I just, I think like to put a bow on this is like, I don't think, I guess if we just sound bite this one, neither of us feels like, there were some extreme things going on here. I think there's a lot of little nuances, and of all the things to focus on, I think what I'm hearing from you is maybe the technical nuances of having a security contact or a pipe package or whatever. Those types of things are actually like good to raise them, but not necessarily the main thing. It sounds like to focus on. It sounds like there's other things to think about here in this move. I don't think either of us, well, I don't want to speak for you, but it sounds like neither of us think it's also like it's as much of a like altruistic type of thing. There's obviously some other stuff behind it. And probably the same opinion as many of our viewers and community. I'd love to hear from the community. I feel like it's I'll say this. I think like you and I are okay often to talk about some things that are maybe like dicier like this. If you don't want to say it publicly and you want to DM us your thoughts, we can anonymize those thoughts and provide, some color to them. But yeah, I definitely am curious what other community members think. I know this is a tough topic because there are so many interests involved, but yeah, I don't know. It's like, I see some of the names behind the project and I'm like, oh, a couple of those companies I really like. Right. And then, on the other hand, while Semgrep is technically a competitor, I love Clint. I love that. I think the company's doing really cool things and I think they've got really good talent over there. So, no contempt or dislike for anybody here. This is just the facts as we see them, I think, is to put a bow on that. Anything you wanted to wrap up on that one, Seth?
No, I'm with you, right? Like, because we have, I mean, there's multiple people in Slack that actually are with some of these different organizations that founded it. Like we've been on podcasts with these guys. They've come on our podcast. And so like, I'm not, yeah, like, I don't think it's a bad thing, right? Like, and I don't think competition is a bad thing in these spaces as well, because it pushes us all to do better, right? And like I said, it's going to be interesting to watch. And if you feel the desire, go play with OpenGrep, go play with Semgrep, right? Like either one of them will actually help you in your application security journey. So it's like stepping into any new organization as a third party. I don't get too hung up or too tied to any one product. I'll be honest, right? Because I'm always going to step into an organization and be introduced to something new, or I'm going to have to deal with. I mean, we learned this early days, like with any of the DAS scanners or the SAS scanners that were out there, right? Like, back in the day, how many times at Fishnet did we switch between Web Inspect and AppScan, right? Like for the dynamic scanning that we were doing, because it seemed like when one would get ahead, the other one would catch up, right? Like, so year over year, we were doing evaluation of these products on which one was the best fit for our purposes. And any organization is going to be doing that. And they should be doing that, right? Like, so we should be evaluating these SaaS tools. There's a reason why we like Semgrep, why we like OpenGrep over some of the traditional SaaS tools like Fortify. And it's mainly the speed. It's the results that are coming out of it are more actionable. Yeah. And so like, I want to see the space progress, and I want to see AI layered on top of that. I want to see like, how to actually utilize these things to speed up the process and make us more effective in our day-to-day jobs and make products more secure. That's the overall goal. So don't get too hung up on the fact that there are these nuances, that there's new stuff that's coming out. It should be happening, and it's indicative of a thriving industry, and an industry where research is happening and people are trying to improve their process.
And actually, that's kind of the thing, right? It's like there are so many new players because of, new capabilities, and things haven't been going so well the last couple decades. Or not that I should say that even. That's not even true. That's actually false. Like they've been going well in the sense that it's been natural evolution, but the evolution's rapidly happening now. So a bunch of new players came out saying, there's new ways to go after it. And I think like what you said is yeah, it's a very positive thing for the community, is that all these players cropped up and said, hey, we haven't shifted left properly, we haven't done this, we haven't done that right, we have noisy tools that are inaccurate, we have this, that, and the other going on. Like let's see what we can do to help out here, and whoever has the coolest approach and best way to do it will win out, and those that don't won't. And that's competitive market forces and to be expected. So I actually like your take, Seth, because it kind of feels a little positive at the end. Makes me feel a little happy.
Yeah, I look at it and I'm like, and that was my initial, like when I dropped that into Slack and I saw OpenGrep.dev pop up, my initial thought was good, right? Like this is a positive thing. We don't want a single vendor that uses the same approach, right? Like to control the complete market, because that's where we start to stagnate. It's the same reason why, like in the proxy space, like there's Zap and there's Burp that have been around forever, but Kaido and some of these new ones as they pop up, right? Like that is a good thing. And like if you work for Portswigger, it means you're going to have to innovate, and you're going to have to keep pushing the envelope to maintain your status within the industry. And any tool is going to be pushed that direction. And if it's not being pushed that direction, we see it start to fall by the wayside. And that's what's happened to some of those bigger tools, right? Yes, I still see Fortify and AppScan Source in places, but really, do we talk about them a lot anymore? Do we feel like there's innovation that's happening from those tools as they've been acquired and, multiple times by different companies? And it seems like they've become more of a standard, like almost cash cow for some of the larger software providers that are out there. No, we just don't get that same level of innovation. Kind of is what it is. So
it is positive. Good. It's good. Competition's good.
Competition's good. Yep.
Yeah.
Cool. Man, dude, like we spend like so much time talking about this.
It's like 46 minutes on this topic or something. Yeah, like 40 minutes, whatever it was. But it's not an easy topic to broach, because there are a lot of feelings that can get hurt here. There are a lot of different factors to take into account. There's naturally some level of conjecture and some level of facts, and we have to find the happy medium between the two. And I think it's a tough one to kind of navigate, but hopefully we did justice to the topic, and, we're fair and balanced in our assessment. And as always, transparent and honest about our actual feelings, which we always aspire to do. Mm-hmm. So hopefully that landed okay. If not, send all hate to Seth, and he can deal with that. And I had no part in any of this. I will edit myself out with deep fakes or something, and I'll put Logi's face on my face.
There you go. We should be able to do that
never
live.
Happened.
Let's be honest. Yeah.
I know, right?
Yeah.
You can. There are tools for that. One of these days, I'm going to show up as Logi, and people are going to immediately understand that I'm not as smart as him, and they already know that. But anyways.
Oh, dude, you're cracking.
Anyways. Good times.
Let's see.
I did like that agent of no thing, because I have experienced some of that, and so have you. So we could talk to that. I did also like, speaking of tooling and new stuff, like I like that the Wireshark people put out an equivalent for system calls. It's supposed to help with like especially cloud infrastructure.
Yeah,
that's
I mean, honestly, okay. So let's talk about that for a second. It won't take too long. I'm posting the link here. mean, this is from Sysdig, right? Like, so it's the Wireshark people. They are releasing a new product. It's called StratoShark. That's extending Wireshark's legacy into the cloud, right? Like, it's basically a tool that you can run locally on a system that does monitor system calls, allows you to build filters similar to what you could do in Wireshark, but for system calls in and of themselves. My initial take, and I want yours here, shortly as well. My initial take is this is great. There are other system call monitoring tools that exist, especially for BSD and Linux and even Windows at this point. So I'm withholding judgment until I actually see it in play and how useful it is in those environments. Right. So that's kind of where I'm at there. What are your thoughts?
I think it's a great team. Obviously, they've done some pretty incredible things with Wireshark. So I mean, it's like what we were saying. Competition, right? Just because some other tools exist today that do something similar doesn't mean that their approach won't be really, really cool, really, really neat. Same UI you're familiar with, right? So that's always nice when you have something you're really like good at and familiar with and can extend and all those kinds of fun things, and you understand how to use, and like you can just apply that in a different domain. So I think that's really cool. I just nothing about the tool. I just thought it was like funny, like in their article about it, how they're like, oh, we might have more gray hair now or less of it altogether, but working on this has been exhilarating just as it was back in the day. And like, I definitely, obviously, that resonates. So I just think it's really, it's more maybe some part of my like nostalgia aspect, wanting this to be super, super cool, frankly. Yeah. Anyways, so that's my thought. I thought it was neat.
Yeah, I'm more interested to see where it goes from there, right? Like, so if we're starting to do detection, we're starting to, right, like we're creating S caps instead of P caps based on what's going on with an environment. That's very intriguing to me, right? And I would love to start to incorporate that into some of the other analysis. I would, honestly, I'd love to be able to generate an S cap from like inside of like a mobile app environment, to be honest with you, right? Frida does this at some level, right? Like, but it's not this same sort of format that you can filter and actually view, and right, like Frida does provide a lot of that, but it's almost competing with it. So I'm waiting for them to see where this pushes, whether they go into those mobile environments as well. Because I mean, realistically, it's just BSD or Linux under the hood as it is, so it should work very in a similar manner, and may actually give some really good insight into what applications are doing within those environments as well. And I'm not saying that you couldn't do the same thing with other tools that are out there, but again, competition is great. And if you have been using Wireshark and you understand how to write those filters and rules, this may be right up your alley and make that more accessible.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Cool. Okay. From there, let's talk a little bit about this before we close things out today. This is from Rami, who's been on the podcast before. And it is how do I want to say this? It's almost a condemnation of saying yes too much, right? As a security group, right? That there are times that it is wholly appropriate for you to pull out the hammer and say no, right?
Yeah.
Like, yeah. And it's more about how you do that than it is about the answer, yes or no. It's more nuanced. Yes.
Yeah. That's no, you just said what I was thinking. I was like, it's more about how you approach it.
Yeah.
Like, not to make it political, because this is not, well, it's explicitly not political is why I'm saying this. I mean this is just generally speaking. Society, if you look back historically, society tends to, and people in general tend to overcorrect. So like they'll go one way very, 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 they'll go in one direction to almost an extreme, and then when it hits a point of being considered extreme, then funny enough, humans have a tend to go the opposite direction and also go the opposite direction in an extreme.
Yeah.
Our extreme was when you and I were coming up. Yeah, no was said a lot. No was a pretty acceptable answer. A no was kind of the way you kept in your head. People thought that was a way to keep, crazy, insecure, scary things from happening. And then we realized, well, if you act like that, you can't. First of all, no one's gonna. People are just gonna. Things are still gonna happen. They're just not gonna happen with you knowing about it. For one, so that's bad. But also too, like you can't really be a department that slows down a business, and we all know that. I think like around that time frame where the Phoenix Project book came out, and a lot of subsequent shift left type of conversations and DevOps and all that kind of came out, like security swung the other way, and a lot of shops swung hard the other way as to just saying yes to everything. And so that's where I'll pause. Hand it over to you, Seth, for your analysis here.
You're absolutely right. Like I loved his, like, again, taking a step back approach. Right. Like you're getting too much into the weeds when you just say, hey, you need to be able to say no, or you need to be able to say yes to everything. Right. And, in the past, as you and I were coming up, it was more about how no was being represented. Right. It was just, there wasn't any context. There was no explanation. It was no as a complete sentence, but it was done poorly. It damaged trust. And that's more of what the discussion has been for us, right? Has been, how do we maintain a relationship and give people options moving forward that lead to better security overall? No is wholly appropriate when someone wants to open up your, anonymous access into your production database via an S3 bucket or whatever, right? Like it's wholly appropriate to say no and try to reframe the question as, no, what are you really trying to accomplish here, right? Like, oh, you have a partner that's paying for access to this specific resource. All right, like that's great. We can do that in a secure manner if you do X, Y, and Z, right? Like, it's more of that relationship that we need to build. And while he says like we should be able to say no, I agree with that. We should not have no as our default answer to things. And I think that's more of the nuance that I'm trying to represent when I do say, don't be an agent of no, right?
Yeah, if you scroll down a little bit, he actually says exactly, well, I think pretty much what you're saying. I think it's scrolled down. I want to say, scroll up. I'm doing this from memory of the article. Yeah. So right there, if you go to those, like you were saying, like each of these, like, yeah, you called out each one of these, but yeah, I think it's all laid out I like this because these bullet points laid out very, very completely. It's like what you just said was there's the bit of the nuance there with like no in or defaulting to yes in a sense and then being selective with no. And then I think like the one that really hit on that, or two that hit that I thought were very important here is no without context, because like that is very, very important because that context actually might lead to a yes. I've seen that before where it's like, no, this is scary, blah, 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 blah. You lay it out and it's like, okay, we can actually mitigate these things by doing this, that, the other. We can work together. So that context is important. And then like the inconsistently part, right? Because then people think like, oh, this is maybe some bias or unfairness or whatever it might be. It could be a lot of other things.
Personal,
that people,
whatever.
Right, yep. Exactly, yeah. So I think those two ones for me were like, oh yes, great. All five of them make sense, but those two for me really hit home. Yeah. Were any of these like hitting home for you specifically that you've like dealt with or have seen experienced in some way?
Over the course of my career, yes, like all of them. I think the biggest thing was the know without context, like that number one, right? Because I've been on the flip side. I've been a developer trying to push out product in an organization and had the security team just say no without any sort of, right? Like, hey, you're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to, right? Like, and when you dig into the reasoning behind it, it's basically they didn't have enough time to review. They didn't have like whatever, right? Like tools available. They didn't understand what it was that the developers were trying to accomplish, right? Like there's usually a litany of reasons behind it. But if they had come back with, no, not right now, because like we just, we're releasing this other product. We've got these other concerns and we want to make sure that it's secure before we actually push it out. Can you give us assurance of that? Right. Like, if you had given all of that up front, it would have come across way better than just this, hey, we're not going to let you accomplish your job that you've been asked to do. Which is like, it's all about perception. I mean, most of what we do as security people is built upon the relationships that we have with the various teams. We're not the ones that are slinging code. We're not the business that's responsible for it. And so it's got to be more nuanced in order to actually accomplish those tasks. And we have to realize when we have capital and when we should actually spend that capital from a threat perspective. And so, yeah, you've just got to be careful, right? Like, and that's what Rami is calling out here, right? Like even saying yes is bad. If we say yes all the time, then you become less relevant to the actual discussion. Yeah. I mean, any organization that has somebody in there that they know they can go to get so from a development perspective, if you know that you can send your PR to someone that just is going to blindly approve it, so that you can push something out, right? You're going to do that because it reduces friction.
Yeah.
So
that's why I think there's a lot of need, but also a lot of room for overhaul in the releases / security review space, because this is where those conversations start, but it's like, it's hard to figure out which of these need that, or it can be like to do it in a quick enough way manually to decide which of these projects require this kind of, because you have to remember, like if you say, and actually he points it out with the asymmetric work, but the reality is like, if you say no with like these reasons and you state those out in a written form, you're going to have a lot of follow-up, and there's going to be lots of little, I mean, frankly, Google Docs and, maybe issues open, thinking about my work at GitHub, right? Like there were lots of docs open. There was lots of issues put on different project boards in different places to sort of track all this work. And I mean, it's an area that's ripe for innovation to like help people do a better job with, assessing thing in a more automated, quicker way. These types of like, okay, this is going to require, more hands-on. This is, this project needs to have some back and forth, and there's going to be quite a bit to track all of that and whatever. And then, these other 95% of projects, they can pass along. They just have to have these requirements applied to them, given what we know about what they're trying to accomplish with that feature and product. So I think I saw one company, I forget their name, who was trying to innovate in that space, maybe, but they weren't even like public, or like they were stealth mode, and it was just from rumors. So I don't know if where that ever went. I hope somebody does, man. That's an area that really needs some innovation.
Yeah.
Like the security review, releases process type stuff.
Yeah. Well, and you start to wonder too, right? Like, I mean, again, going back to the LLMs, like how you can harness some of that to, help improve your process, or even improve your like prioritization of projects in general. Large organizations struggle with this, all over the place. And it's kind of inherent with some of the companies we work with, as an application security partner. That's built into the discussions that we have about scoping, is whether or not it's appropriate, right? Like, guess what? This change doesn't need 2 weeks of my effort because you're just, it's UI stuff. It's right, like it's user, user capabilities, right? Like our user interface, and it makes things prettier and a little bit easier for the customer support agents, but you didn't actually change any of the authorization stuff under the hood. And I mean, I know you're starting to do some of that analysis too on a, PR perspective.
Yeah. But not from like a security review release process. Like,
yeah.
I think, well, yeah, maybe that's something that will happen is like systems, different types of systems you're using, whether, whatever kind of system you're using, maybe they'll all kind of tie and start to feed into each other and do a better job of, and I know I don't want to talk about the 4-letter word that I hate, or not hate, but like, I don't want to talk about the 4-letter product that people claim do those types of things. But anyways, whatever, like there definitely is some room there for innovation. So fingers crossed somebody goes after it. There is a guess I wanted to like. We got a yes from a very interesting guest. I just don't have a date from for this person yet, but I do want to let people know because Paul McCarty has been absolutely swinging for the fences with his package work, malicious package work, and a lot of it was with NPM and. So there's been a lot more. I've seen, I personally through Paul have seen a lot more, interest in the NPM ecosystem and whatnot. And so the guests that we have come on, when we can confirm dates, I'll just put it at like this person is the person you want to talk to about this kind of stuff. Leave it at that.
It is.
So
very
excited for this.
He is the one that has built it all. So yes. There's a couple people there that like I'd be talking about, but he is definitely. There's 2 names that come up, and that he's one of the 2. So, that'll be good.
Cannot wait. Gonna tease it out, and as soon as we have official dates, we'll put it out on the podcast, and you'll want to tune in for that. If you don't have questions, if you play in the NPM space and you don't have questions, or malicious package space and you don't have questions, I'd be very surprised. So we'll solidify that out. And again, we'll be at CactusCon next week. Yeah. So
you're
there. Come say hi.
We'll be at CactusCon. If you haven't yet, sign up for the newsletter. Right, like it summarizes kind of what we're doing on a weekly basis. And different shows depending on the schedule and when we've actually like broadcast and other things. But sign up for the newsletter that's coming out once a week as well. All right, great show today. We will see everyone next week. Join us on Slack or, ping us if you've got additional questions or comments. All right. Thanks all.
Thank you.